Okay, everybody. If we could come to order. I'm John Rossi, Professor of Psychiatry in the department, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our grand round speaker this afternoon, Dr. Nancy Coyne. Dr. Coyne is a general psychiatrist. Half of her time is with campus health with the university, and the other half is in private practice that, among other things, includes equine facilitated psychotherapy that we will hear about, and that I understand from you, Nancy, is based in Sonoita, south of here. She is a graduate in English literature from City College in New York, and then is a graduate of the Medical College of Pennsylvania, and later obtained her residency at Hahnemann. These institutions have since been fused and named Drexel School of Medicine. Is that what it is? Or College of Medicine, or University, Drexel University. She had a years-long apprenticeship in Epona Center in equine facilitated experiential education and psychotherapy, which preceded her settling here in Tucson. Before that, she had many, many years of private practice and community work, mainly in Maine, mainly in Augusta, and to some degree in Portland. And she also works with trauma and with addiction, and has had papers presented in many settings on a whole variety of topics, including the use of equine therapy, substance abuse, alcoholism, etc. So I very much look forward to her presentation and to this fascinating topic, and so we will be hearing from her about equine facilitated psychotherapy. So Nancy, go right ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Rossi. Can people hear me? I can't tell if this, yes? Okay. So I came to Arizona 4 years ago, to participate in a workshop and learn about how horses could help people to learn about themselves and relationship. Shelley Rosenberg was my teacher. And so that first workshop was life-changing. During the course of it, one of the participants came and said, I'm so constricted. I had a very critical family, and I can't cry. And that's what he wanted to do, was to unlock his ability to express feeling. So he knelt down in front of this huge Percheron, and we all held our breath because the horse's feet were this big. The man was very short. And the horse just nuzzled him on one shoulder and licked up along his bald head and down the other shoulder. And by the time he got down to the second shoulder, we were all weeping, including this lovely man. And he said, "It feels like a benediction." So I ran home to my studio and made this picture, which for me holds the essence of how horses can help us to heal both our own personal trauma and also how people can learn from the horses at this time in history when there's so much trouble in both our personal worlds and in the world in general. So Shelley and I just finished doing a 4-day workshop we do called Horses as Healers for Trauma Survivors. And so it is a very intense experience with people who suffered deeply and who come to learn from the horses that they are worthwhile humans, that they're worthwhile creatures, that they're acceptable just as they are, that it doesn't matter if they do things perfectly or if they have advanced degrees. So I want to share with you just some images and some narratives about how this work has transformed my therapy practice, which and how it has come to synthesize for me all the things that I've learned as a dynamic psychotherapist, as a cognitive behavioral therapist, as a systems therapist, and utilizing all of the things that we know from body work and spiritual practice. The horses come to help us to learn how to synthesize all that to use in healing. So this isn't really anything new, although it's very much in vogue now. In the 5th century, horseback riding was used for rehabilitating soldiers. And Florence Nightingale in the 19th century said that animals are excellent companions for the sick. And by the 60s, horses began to be used for therapeutic practice with children who had neurological problems or physical handicaps. And then for children who had emotional problems and behavioral trouble. And so under various names, equine assisted psychotherapy, equine facilitated learning, equine facilitated psychotherapy, equine facilitated experiential learning. It's a joke in this new field about how many acronyms there are. But basically, it's about that horses have come to be recognized as powerful teachers and co-facilitators for personal development and psychotherapy. Have any of you read the book The Horse Boy, or seen, there was a documentary shown in Tucson a couple weeks ago about the horse boy, the autistic 6-year-old whose parents discover that he has an extraordinary affinity with horses and that the horses help this boy. In the documentary, it's quite amazing. You see this autistic child who is really having uncontrollable outbursts go from being miserable and uncontrollable to being able to play with another child, being able to express affection, being able to speak. He learns to get toilet trained, and really it was the horses who facilitated all of this. It's really a fascinating book and a fascinating documentary if you have a chance to see it. So why horses? I mean, why not, people are always asking me, why not other animals? And some of my colleagues work with other animals as healers. Dogs, cats. We have, at our ranch, we have cats, one cat, dogs, chickens, llamas, a sheep, goats, 2 goats, and 11 horses. And they are all in one field, and they all interact with each other in the most amazingly Noah's Ark-like way. However, the horses have special talents. For one thing, they're very generous to us humans. They're really interested in interacting with us in a way that's not really dependent. I mean, dogs will wag their tails and come to meet you with pleasure no matter what happens. But a horse requires that you really earn his or her, I don't know what word to use. You have to earn a relationship with a horse. They don't lie. They respond very sensitively to our body language and really to the 90% of our communication, which is nonverbal. They can sense increased arousal in the form of welcome, in the form of raised heart rate or blood pressure or faster breathing, and they can sense this from a great distance and reflect it back to us. So that they are wonderful mirroring consultants. Dr. Hamilton gave a very interesting talk, some of you may have heard a month or so ago, about the mirror neurons. And the horses may have more of that going on in their brains, more mirror neurons in their brains than us humans. The horses are incredibly sensitive to what we are actually feeling. One of my favorite stories was the only time I ever saw a child dumped from a horse in a therapeutic riding program. It was back in Maine. A little 9-year-old got on a horse for the first time, and I said, "Johnny, you look a little nervous. Are you scared?" "No, I'm not scared." And this 25-year-old mare who never dumped anybody, he's just walking around the ring, and she went, and off he came. And it was because he was trying to act like he was not scared when he was. And the horse knew it and said, "Get real, kid." He wasn't hurt. So the horses sense our emotions, our unconscious intentions, and reflect them back to us. A very funny thing happened when there was a Reiki class at the Epona Center, which I took, and the Reiki instructor, who's a professor here, said, "Would you like to try this on your horse?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to try it on my horse." So I'm sort of trying to channel the energy to my horse, and my horse is going. So I'm sort of puzzled by this. What did I do wrong? And Shelley, who was around the corner, said, "Well, you were doing it like this, like I was scared of what was going to happen." And the horse felt the fear, and of course didn't want anything to do with that. So they help us to get in touch with what is not obvious. Equine-facilitated psychotherapy, like any other form of psychotherapy, is complicated and can be used for experiential learning, for corrective emotional experience, for practicing new behavioral and neural pathways, and for personal growth and development. In my experience, it synthesizes insight psychotherapy, cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy, body work, and spiritual practice, as well as helping to ignite people's innate creativity. We spend so much of our modern lives indoors, fixated on the computer, disconnected from our physical selves. And in this century, the horses, and the last century, the horses are finally no longer needed to transport us and our goods. They're no longer needed to take us to war. They can now help us to reclaim our animal vitality, reconnecting us to nature and body sensation, intuition, and emotion. In a way, they force us, force is a funny word, they bring us in touch with the basic experience of life and death, joy and pain. And we have recently had this experience very poignantly with the loss of a horse, my horse. And you can't not be in touch with, it's like delivering babies or sitting with dying patients. The horses bring us daily in touch with our, with life and death. Horses are masters of emotional intelligence. To them, emotions are simply information. They have a very highly developed ability to respond instantly to subtle changes in the environment and to variations in their own arousal or tension and in that of the creatures around them. They need to know if another herd member sees or senses danger and they need to move to safety. They act quickly in the best interest of each horse and of the herd. So this highly developed perception can be accessed and improved in us humans. We might call it intuition, gut or heart intelligence. It's that lightning-like inspiration, the moment of inspiration for the artist or the scientist. The quick, accurate response of the trained warrior or athlete. And with practice and the help of our mirroring horses, we can learn to check in with our body sensations and emotions and develop our emotional intelligence and intuition in the service of greater vitality and congruency. So equine-facilitated psychotherapy can be like any psychotherapy, short, long, individual, group. It is intense experiential learning. It works with by the horse's mirroring. Like when it's done in a group, it requires creating both physical safety and emotional safety and agreeing to be authentic as the horses are. We need to tune into the body and its messages, learning to use emotions and behavior as information, access our authentic selves, practice setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, reclaiming projections, and practicing sitting in uncomfortable emotions until we get clarity. Understanding the past, but focusing on being in the present. And like any psychotherapy, we hope that we are improving self-awareness, self-esteem, developing empowerment, healing damaged trust, inspiring and unlocking innate creativity and heightening vitality, and changing dysfunctional life patterns. Horses remind us to just be present and experience the moment. Horses help us slow down and breathe deeply, lowering autonomic arousal and diminishing anxiety. We did a workshop with Iraqi vets, with Americans who had been in Iraq, who were veterans who had PTSD last spring. And we asked the vets what their level of anxiety was on a scale of 1 to 10 at the beginning of the workshop. And they all said 12, 13, 15, off the chart. And they all had, these were people with severe PTSD. And they did some very simple exercises with the horses. I think Shelley had them hold hands across the back of a horse. These were couples, husbands and wives, holding hands across the horse, feeling the horse's belly on their bellies, and just breathing with the horse. And they all felt enormously calm afterwards. It was a very interesting experience. The simple act of grooming calms humans and horses and is one of the simple exercises we sometimes do with people. Horses are very good at helping us discern who and how to trust safely. If we don't protect our boundaries, they can walk all over us, and they're very big, and they can hurt us. Not on purpose, but they can hurt us. So we need to learn to set boundaries clearly, cleanly, and with the right amount of energy. Not too much, or we'll scare the horse, and not too little, or we'll get walked all over. It's one of the most powerful exercises that we do with patients and clients is to do boundary exercises with a horse. Because if you can set your boundary with a huge cantering horse and make sure that the horse respects your space, you can do it with your bossy, controlling spouse, too. One of the things we do is practice scanning the body to see what truth it holds. And the horses help us to pay attention to nonverbal communication. Sometimes we'll send somebody into a round pen with a horse and with the task of doing absolutely nothing, whatever they'd like. And the horse will come over and poke them someplace, the belly or the hip, and it turns out that they had a pain in the belly, or they were holding their breath, or that there's something going on in that hip. The horse will sense what's going on in the human's body and help us. This beautiful young woman, when I met her, was 14 and a juvenile delinquent. She took off one day in Maine and ran away, and her mother and I chased her and found her on top of a barn, literally, in a rainstorm. And we had to get the police to come and get her down, and they had to handcuff her. I mean, she was uncontrollable. She has become a practitioner of centered riding and this sort of new way of doing horsemanship with horses and people. And she's very gifted at it and has become really empowered, and as you can see with this horse. And this is a woman who has had enormous trauma in her life, and who has come to 2 of our Horses as Healers workshops. She's a graduate of 2 of them, and this was a moment of triumph for her. Horses have a way of invoking compassion, wisdom, and awe. This is a baby horse that Shelley delivered, and in spite of all the best care, he died at 3 days of a congenital defect. He had a tear in his mesentery and his gut twisted, and he died. And we all grieved terribly. But for me, making an image of this was very helpful, and we often encourage people to make images about their experiences with the horses as a way of accessing the deepest part of the psyche, the oldest emotional experiences. A woman I worked with for years published a book about her experience as an incest survivor. And what was most healing for her was this retired racehorse who she lunged. And as he ran around the arena, and he was enormous and powerful, and you could feel his hoofs beating in the ground underneath you. And she was asking him to go faster and slower and faster and slower. And it was an incredibly empowering experience. Many people live out their lives, as we know, feeling isolated in the middle of community. And one of the things we work on is trying to help people to live in more authentic community, the way the horses live in a herd, which means that we need to be honest about our feelings and sensitive to the feelings of others, which is always a challenge. Sometimes it's cold. This is an old horse who has a special gift for helping people express grief. He was abandoned himself, and he takes his special job very seriously. This young woman, and I didn't catch it in the photograph, threw her arms around his head, and as you can see, his head is as big as her torso, and began to sob into his forelock. And she must have stayed there for 10 minutes, sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And then she got a little self-conscious that she was taking up too much time for the group, so she backed off, and he came over to her and he said, "No, you're not done." Stuck his head back into her arms. The horse can help us process grief and depression, and will stay fully attentive until the emotional work is done. Sometimes we just have to have lunch with a horse. You can't hear it here, but this horse was eating, oh, now, maybe, no, the sound's off. You can't hear it, but he was enjoying his lunch and reminding us to stop and eat more mindfully. This is the first drawing of the series of benediction. The simple act of drawing one's experience in the presence of a horse often brings up profound emotion. Sometimes we actually paint the horse the way the Native Americans did. This horse loved to be painted. This is that big white draft horse who he loved to be painted because he got to have a bath and get rubbed down afterwards. This horse invited us to dance. Here the horse decided to run and play in the paddock, and the people needed to let him know where they felt comfortable having him racing around like that. The healing power of loving connection. It's one of our colleagues in England. That's her again, with a mini horse. So horses inspire us to feel reverence. And this is that same white horse, 2-3 years later, after he'd been rescued. And a young psychotherapist who I was supervising came and stayed with us for 6 months and fell in love with Bo, the horse. And when the ranch where we originally were working closed and some of the horses had to find new homes, she took him with her to Texas. And there she is. So we happen to live in a hotbed of equine facilitated experiential learning and psychotherapy. The mother of the field, Barbara Rector, has a program right here in Tucson called Adventures in Awareness. She was the founder, I believe, of Trot. Was she? The founder of Trot, which is a therapeutic riding center. And Ann Alden, who works with Barbara, lives in Sonoyta right around the corner from us. Laura Brinkerhoff runs a therapeutic program at Cottonwood for patients. There's a master's degree program in equine facilitated psychotherapy. The only one in the country is at Prescott College. Linda Kahanov is now working out of Vail. Shelley Rosenberg, I just named your program the ARC because we have so many animals. Carol Rausch works in Canela, Is that how you pronounce it? At the Medicine Horse Ranch. Marla Kuhn is in Patagonia running a program. Ariana Strozzi is in Sonoma County in California. There's a national organization called the Equine Facilitated Mental Health Association, where we're presenting a paper in April. Mary Louise Gould does mindfulness meditation and horses in Sonoyta also. Sierra Oral is at In Balance, which is a program right here in Tucson for adolescents with horses. Lori Kelly works at Cantor in Sierra Vista as a program for veterans. And Barbara Dowdy and Louise Papama, my colleagues from Maine, are coming out to do a program with us shortly, and they're working in Maine. And many other people all over the country. But we really are a center for this kind of work. So I welcome any questions or comments that people have.
You know that movie with about Sandra Bullock was in it, and she had some therapy, and they had to go and lift the horse's leg, and you can't lift the leg apparently if you're scared. Is that true? That you know, in the scene in the movie, and I think they did in Oprah too. Like where you have to lift the leg and he won't let you lift it unless you're not scared or something like that.
Shelley, could you comment on that?
That's true. And then if you're not scared, it's easy to lift.
It's good to go back into your body and ask your body the question of what the fear is. And then as soon as you express it verbally, then the horse will lift his leg up.
Wow.
So what it really is the horse wants you to be congruent. Another story about that was a little girl who was in a troubled kids program in Maine. She's sitting on the horse for the first time like this. And I said, Susie, are you scared? She said, yes. I said, would you tell Spring that you're scared? She said, Spring, I'm really scared. And the horse is relaxed. So she rides around a few times, and we sort of encouraged her to relax, and the motion of the horse helped her relax. And about 3 times around the arena, she said, I think Spring likes me. So, I mean, I think that it's the being congruent that the horse responds to. And often with children, the horses are very, very patient. You know, if a grown-up approaches them pretending they're not scared, they'll be much more like, isn't that true in your experience?
Because the adults have more baggage.
The adults have more baggage, yeah. Yes?
You know, it seems fairly free-flowing. Could you fill in a little bit of structure? I am task-oriented, and I'd like to know some detail of how do people get started, their beginning, middle, and end,
Okay.
who refers what to whom, and what do you do along with the horse?
Okay. So Dr. Rossi is asking, this seems very free-flowing, and what is the actual process and the structure? And we have some fairly defined structure, and then we have some fairly free-flowing exercises that we do with horses. We do 2 kinds of things. We do workshops which are structured, which have specific exercises that people do. And some of the exercises I've sort of hinted at. For example, we teach people to do a body scan and then to check in with their own bodies and check in with the horses as to what intuitively they're getting and how that fits with their own problems or intentions. We have exercises where people are asked to think about what is their deepest desire for the interaction. Do they want to ask a question of the horse? Do they want to discover something about themselves? Do they want to get some guidance, or they might just want to connect with the horse or have fun with the horse or relax? So the person gets in touch with what's their own intention, And then we ask them to go in with the horse, having taught them some safety boundaries if they're beginners. And they spend time with the horse, and then they come out, and we ask them to talk about the experience. And it's often from the outside, it looks like nothing much is happening, but people will have profound emotional experiences because of the capacity of the horse to interact in this special way. An example would be a patient of mine who's having marital difficulties. And she's trying so hard, and she can't make it work, and she can't make it work. And she goes into she's a horse person, she knows horses. She goes into the round pen. The horse walks to the other side of the ring. So she goes over to him, and she's scratching him and petting him and saying, nice horse, and the horse is like pulling away on the other side of the ring. And she tries again, and she tries to sort of play with his mouth, and this horse is having nothing to do with her. And she finally gets frustrated, and she walks over to the other side of to the opposite side of the arena, and she stands there, and she kind of gives up. And the horse comes over and puts his head on her heart. And she looked at me and she said, oh my God, that's what's going on with my husband. So what happens is people can sort of see their own behavior patterns in the interaction with the horse. Sometimes we do groups, we frequently do groups, and sometimes it's the other group participants who might give some feedback, and they might see things that the participant doesn't see about their own behavior. So we do have structured exercises. And then we have exercises where people move the horse, where people approach the horse, check in, see what's going on in their own bodies, in their own emotions, see what fears are coming up. And then we might ask them to do what we call a reflective ride. And they would actually get on the horse and see what's going on, what comes up when they're on the horse, which frequently is exactly what's going on in their lives. We have boundary exercises we do with a horse where we show people how to approach a horse, what the horse's body language means, and how to set a boundary when the horse approaches them. And that's usually a very powerful exercise. An example from my own experiences, I was being a smart aleck, and I volunteered to be the demonstrator for Linda Kahana. So I go in the round pen with the horse, and the horse comes over and he's nuzzling me, and I think, oh, the horse is being so nice, he loves me, right? And then I notice that I'm walking backwards, and the horse is pushing me around the arena. And I said, Tigger, back up. And he looked at me like, so I got the whip and I went, Tigger. And he continued to push me around the ring. And finally, Linda had to show me how much energy it was going to take to set a boundary with this horse at this moment. And it took quite a lot of energy. I had to take the whip and hit it on the ground really hard, much harder than I was accustomed or comfortable doing. Now, is that an issue of my life? I would say so. So people learn lots of, this is not different from what we do in any other kind of psychotherapy. It's just that the horse is helping us. I don't know if that answers some of your questions. Yes?
I was wondering what kind of criticisms you've had to respond to. I can imagine somebody saying, oh, you're just anthropomorphizing. Oh, this isn't evidence-based or something. What kind of criticisms have you had to wrestle with?
I say come out and do a workshop. It isn't evidence-based yet. Like so much of what we do in medicine, it takes a while before you get enough experience to see how you're going to test this out. But we've had lots of mental health professionals and psychiatrists who've come through our programs, and it's really quite amazing to experience the power of the horse. I mean, it doesn't mean you forget how to prescribe medication.
Could you comment on where you are as far as being able to make it affordable to people, or coverage by insurance, or you talked about the Iraqi vets, is the VA contracting you? I mean, how is it working at this point in the process of your work?
Well, if you look at the people who are doing this work in our community, people are funding it in different kinds of ways. Are you familiar with the costs of horse maintenance?
I imagine it's very high.
Yeah. Yeah, it's excruciatingly expensive to do anything with horses. So people, Barbara Rector has a grant. She's working with Ann Baldwin, who's a professor here, to study something about how the horses can help us to get our heart rates and blood pressure down, and to reduce stress, and to get our breathing and heart rates coherent. So they've got a grant to study that. That's one way people do it. Laura Brinkerhoff works for a hospital, and I don't know how the insurance pays for it, but they call it psychotherapy. Ann Alden and Lori Kelly both work at Cantor, which is a program like Trot in Sierra Vista, and they have some grants, and they get paid very little. Linda Kohanov has managed to run a huge facility for a couple of years, and then the economy hit, and so she had to sort of do it on a smaller scale. People pay huge amounts of money to come to these programs. I mean, it is unbelievable to me how much money people will pay to come to these programs. Barbara Dowdy ran a therapeutic riding program in Maine for 15 years as a nonprofit and scrounged grants. And she managed to do it for 15 years. So there are lots of ways to do it. Shelley and I are working at the moment privately. We do have a nonprofit organization with Barbara Dowdy and Louise Papama, which is able to accept grant money. We haven't done that yet. The people who are working with vets are looking for grants because, veterans can't afford to pay the cost of what it takes.
What's the number of, can someone benefit just in one session, or what's the number of sessions that you see in?
What's the number of sessions, or can people benefit from one session? I don't know how to answer that question. It's sort of like when we first started doing EMDR 15 years or so ago, we were doing, a 3-hour session as a one-shot thing. Somebody would refer a patient to me and say, this person needs EMDR, would you do it? And that was the way people did it then. I wouldn't do EMDR that way now. If I'm going to do EMDR now, I want to do it as a part of an ongoing therapy because I think that works better that way. The work with the horses is, intense experiential learning. So a lot can happen in one day or a few hours, but I don't know. How would you answer that question, Shelley?
On the average workshop, it's 4 days. And we have people come back for the same workshop 2 or 3 times. But we have lots of people that don't come back and really have had a life-changing experience.
The man whose picture is, excuse me, oops, oh well. The man whose picture is on the benediction picture is a therapist who is 50-ish. And after his first workshop, he went back and turned his life around so that he could do this kind of work. because he wanted to do work that was more authentic for him. Now, you know, was that psychotherapy? He certainly experienced a therapeutic, you know, a corrective emotional experience, a major corrective emotional experience. And he did a lot of, I'm sure he did a lot of other work too. So I think your question is well taken. This is not a cure-all, you know, it's not some new snake oil cure-all, but it's a very powerful form of psychotherapy. Yes?
I would think with such big instruments, those horses, that your liability insurance would be big. And I'm wondering, other than the child that got thrown from the horse, have people ever been hurt?
Well, we've been very lucky. We've never had anybody hurt. I mean, I have, in 5 years, I have not had anybody hurt. Even, I mean, that child fell on soft ground. Could have been hurt. We do have liability insurance. I mean, it's not as bad as OBGYNs, but it's pretty...
The horses, are these specially selected? Do you land on them? How do you choose these horses?
How do you choose these horses? Shelley, speak to that.
The horses know the work instinctively. It's us that have to get along to catch up to them. We just, they're donated to us, or we will purchase some horses.
There are horses who have special talents. We don't always know until we engage them. The big white draft horse, whose picture I showed you, was a neglected old stallion. He was in the backyard of a trailer, and somebody said, "Would you please get him? He's 15 years old, and you can ride him." And we went, and it was the dirtiest, most neglected horse I'd ever seen. He was a rack of bones, and he was a stallion. And he wasn't 15, he was 25. and we brought him home and cleaned him up, and he had to be gelded so that he could get along with the other horses and live in the herd. And the picture of the young woman who threw her arms around his head, that was his first therapy experience. He'd never done this work before, and we had no idea what his talents were. So some horses seem to be more suited to it than others. And the more they do it, the more we see, is this a horse who likes to do this kind of work or not? I mean, we have horses who, if we're doing a workshop and we're going out to get a horse for the workshop, and we go out to the field, because they live in a field, they don't live in a barn. We go out to the field to get the horse, and the horse we were thinking to get goes and runs to the opposite side of the pasture. We know they don't want to work that day. But mostly, they like to do this work. Our new horse, we just got a horse 3 days ago, and we were doing a workshop over the weekend where we had, some of you have been to the place, and we had a participant in a round pen with a horse, and our new horse, and then other participants were sitting right outside the round pen, just being witness, in the witness position. And the new horse, Teddy, said, "Oh, I want to play that game too. Can I come?" And he just walked right over to the people who were sitting outside the round pen, and he's nuzzling everybody, and he's, you know, "Can I do that too?" I mean, it was clear he wanted to try. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
You're riding the horse. Is it usually bareback?
Riding the horse, are we usually bareback? We do one exercise with a horse bareback, but generally when we're riding, we're using saddles because I think that's better for the horse. Is that right? Yes?
Do you know any places near Phoenix or South Phoenix that do?
Any places in Phoenix?
There's a place in Cave Creek.
Cave Creek?
It's on the Epona approved instructors list, the Dow list.
If you're interested in finding out more about the nature of the workshops or the people that are doing them or where there are workshops available around the world, the website is dowavequus.com. taoofequus.com. taoofequus.com. Is that right? That's right. So thank you all.